Hi, I'm Chris Grimm, founder, coach, principal consultant of ARIA Consulting. For 24 years, we've been serving leaders and their teams around the world. This podcast, which I wanted to call The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, but is called And Then I, is nothing scripted, nothing fancy. I promise that we'll be talking about successes and failures. It's the gold, I call it, that you find only in real stories with real leaders in real time. With that, I invite you to sit back, soak up the wisdom here of these everyday superheroes. Enjoy. Hi, everybody. Very excited about this episode. We are doing something different. It's just me, Chris Grimm, so that's not different. But today, Karuna and I are with one of our colleagues, and instead of interviewing a CEO, a client, a leader who's in role, we decided to invite one of our colleagues who's really an expert to talk about what we believe is a hot topic at the moment, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Lots of organizations in all industries, seems to be everywhere, the conversation, which is how do we do this better, or what are we doing? An exploration of, like I said, this hot topic. And since you are all leaders and managers trying to be your best, we thought we would have a conversation today and help maybe explain some things, help you find some tools or learn some things today so that maybe it's not so scary if it is scary to you, or give you a way to approach that in your organization if it maybe is a program and you're not sure how to work that into what you're doing with your team. So without further ado, I want to make sure you know the two people I'm with, these awesome humans. One who you probably have met before, Karuna Merchandani, my partner in crime, is how you've probably heard me refer to her before if you've been on any of other podcasts. Also the voice of ARIA Consulting, if you have taken any of our self-paced learning programs, that's her. And today I really want to mention, I asked her to put another hat on, which is Karuna at one point in time was our client, in fact, 2 times over. And once in a senior SVP of HR role, and in another, she was VP of technical operations. So she's seen the topic we're going to talk about today in action in 2 different executive roles. And I thought that would be a great perspective. And then, Karuna, do you want to say hi before I?
Yeah, hi, everyone. Happy to be back. Can't wait to talk about this topic.
There's that voice. And then, of course, our very special guest and a colleague of ours who's truly an expert in this area, as far as we're concerned. I think you're going to think that too. Dr. Sandra Martinez, president of Fénix Leadership, someone who knows something about this that we don't. So I just wanted to add that, right? Karuna and I couldn't do this without her. We're excited to have this conversation about this topic for you, with her, with us, because we don't do that. We don't integrate a lot of diversity, inclusion. And by the way, I'm using those terms and some of you might not actually know what I'm talking about because maybe in your company, they call it DI or they call it DEI. There's acronyms. There's a lot of terminology around these topics. And I'm going to let Sandra give you a little bit more context about her and her work, and then we'll dive right on in. So Sandra, welcome.
Thank you. I'm really honored and delighted to be here. Karuna and Chris and I have had some really dynamic and energetic conversations, and we want to bring that energy to you today. Just briefly, I am the president and founder of Fénix Leadership and Development, and we focus on coaching and leadership development and consulting and organizational change. And I've more recently, in the past couple of years, been more explicitly working in DEI, and it was sort of an organic expansion because I really feel that diversity, equity, and inclusion is about being strategic, and it's about being inclusive. It's being the best that you are in the marketplace, and it's really a strategic issue. What else can I tell you about myself? Well, I have sort of a checkered career because I originally worked in the arts. I owned an art gallery in Santa Fe as a young professional, and I'm a musician. I did that before I earned a doctorate in business administration, but my focus has always been leadership and leadership development and org change. And now I'm a coach and work under the auspices of Fénix Leadership and Development. And I think that's sufficient as an introduction. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. It's really good. So let's jump in here. So I started this out saying this was a hot topic. So maybe we can start there. Like, why, if there's someone out there who doesn't know what I'm talking about or is thinking, what does she mean this is a hot topic, that maybe first we can just level set on why right now. And we're recording this in June of 2021. So regardless of when you listen to this, you can just get some context on this. Like, why is diversity, inclusion, and equity, why is it a hot topic right now for businesses? So maybe you can help me frame that.
So I think, there would be a lot of different answers for that, but I think the topical one is we celebrated the year anniversary of George Floyd's death. And it wasn't that the issues were not existing before. They very much were present. And I think it was a tipping point in that, especially Black colleagues and Black friends that I have, they couldn't contain it any longer.
Mm-hmm.
I guess one thing, let me just add here that one thing I've learned in my consulting and coaching practice is people that come from another background, brown people or Black people, they are exercising grace and forgiveness toward us all the time. And when we might say something that is offensive and we don't realize it's offensive, when they're working in a white dominated organization and they're not getting equity in terms of rewards for their performance, advancement, and so forth, they're trying to make a judgment about when to bring that up. And I think that there was just a point where they had to speak up. And in a way, it was a gift. I think it was a gift, not George Floyd dying, but it was the gift of George Floyd that we had to talk about it at that point. From my point of view, I think it's very strategic. I think if companies want to succeed in the marketplace, if they want to reach all sorts of markets, if they want to really recruit and retain the best talent from in whatever color or shape or form it comes in, wherever it comes from, they need to look at these issues seriously. I don't know if that answered your question, Chris.
I think it frames it well, and I maybe want to expand this, and I'll pass it to you, Karuna. Like, I'm in my 50s, and so for anyone who might be younger than that, who might be listening or watching, this isn't necessarily a new topic, like you said. It was kind of brought up to the forefront again as a priority in the last year, for sure, because of social unrest and issues related to George Floyd, but also I think that it's related to gender. It's related to now, very new ideas seemingly in the workplace around not just male, female, but also respecting people's choices around sexual orientation and all the different diverse ways people come as individuals into an organization. And I know the reason I referenced my age, age is also a part of that. And the last thing I'll say before I pass it to Karuna is that my own experience as a white American woman in the workplace, basically for the last 30 years, is that we've always had what I feel are fragmented, programmatic conversations around what diversity means and how the workplace can basically just be better at it, whatever it means at that moment, right? Whatever the hot topic is, or the trigger point, I should say, that makes it hot. But I feel like it's different now. I feel like we have a door open to have this conversation and do this better in a different way. And Karuna, I don't know if you agree or disagree, and maybe I missed something.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything both of you have said. The only thing I'll add is that aside from the social unrest that spilled over into the workplace and caused these conversations to have started, the one thing that's different, and I'm also in my early 50s, and 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I first started out, I am not a white woman. I was the only international person that my company had hired. I was the only foreigner in that office. I was also the only woman in that office, being an engineer. And I didn't have the luxury to expect the company or the workplace to be diverse or to be different. And I think that's changed today, because I think this millennial generation, their expectations are different. They expect a diverse workplace. So I didn't have that luxury. I don't think my generation of diverse people had that luxury in this country. Whereas today, if you want to hire the best and retain your top talent generationally, you've got to change the way business has been done and hiring has been done. So I think that's also a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate how we brought up a lot of different types of diversity, and it's a similar dynamic. And one term or one concept that rings forward at this moment is psychological safety, is how to create psychological safety for people that are different, or for everyone in the workplace, but especially those people that might feel marginalized or who are not part of the power culture within the organization, right? For whatever reason. And so how do we know from the research, we know from research at Google, we know from Amy Edmondson's research that teams perform at their best when they experience psychological safety, when they can bring their whole selves to the effort, to the workplace, when they don't have to cover up making mistakes, they can learn from them, when they can give feedback. We know all those things are really important to performance over the short term and the long term.
Yeah, I mean, I think in addition to productivity and engagement levels that are higher in diverse workplaces, the bottom line for executives, there's tons of data on this and research that's done. It improves their bottom line, right? They are more profitable as businesses if you are a more diverse workplace, because your employee productivity is high. And there are a whole bunch of reasons for that. And there's a whole bunch of data backing that up. So even if executives, I know there's always short term, they're always looking for growth, right? They want revenue upside. Well, diversity is one of them. It gets you the numbers. It gets you. So if for nothing else, if that's all you care about, your bottom line, do it for that alone, right? If that's,
but it's so difficult. Look, I want just full transparency to all of our listeners and viewers. One of the reasons we teed this up, and I really wanted to be on with these two and have this conversation for all of your benefit, is because it is easy to talk about. And most people don't disagree that generally more diversity is a good idea. There aren't very many people. I know they exist, by the way, but not very many people in corporate environments or executives are going to say, no, bad idea. Executing it and making sustainable change around what we're talking about. And like I said, and Sandra said, they're like integrating it right into leadership and strategy, and doing this strategically and sustainably into your business is hard. And I just want to put out there what I believe is hard, just from my own experience coaching executives. And then the two of you are welcome to kind of whatever you want to do after that. But I feel like, because it is a hot topic, because we've offended people. People are upset, angry, and it's not just black, white, right? It's women and men. It's all the different ways diversity is defined, and the different groups of people, period, in the workplace, that we've had years and years and years of groups of people feeling left out, feeling minimized, all the things that we've described. And so it makes this a sensitive, complicated issue, because conversations, when we get down to brass tacks here, we're talking about people interacting with other in one-on-ones and in meetings. And when this topic shows itself like it is right now as like the topic du jour, it feels like, right? It's a thing, and it's here and it's everywhere. Now, all of a sudden you have, and you said it beautifully, Sandra, the power structure, which in many organizations have been white men, white women, whatever, in our country, that has been it. But frankly, it doesn't matter. It could be any group of people. If you have an aligned group of people that they're all kind of the same. They're
Right.
not that diverse.
Right.
And they've been the power hierarchy and structure for a while, whether that's a group of women, a group of men, a group of Mormons, I don't really care.
The
Right
the
now-
homogeneity of the population. Yeah.
Exactly right. So right now what happens is that everyone is aware, okay, we have to change that. And so what I find in coaching is that no one knows how to start that conversation without offending someone else, because your personal values all of a sudden you're vulnerable.
Right.
Right. There's a vulnerability. And you said psychological safety, Sandra, and I do believe that this is a critical part of this too. But creating psychological safety for everyone is almost impossible, or at least most leaders I'm coaching right now look at me like, I don't even know what to do. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to tiptoe in or around this. If HR and legal tell me to do XYZ, then I guess that's what we have to do. And I actually think that's not sustainable, right? To me,
Correct.
that's not actually what should be happening. But I think that's where we are, right? This is what we're trying to break through.
Yeah. And if I could jump in right now, because I love how you emphasized conversation, because conversation is like the building block.
Mm-hmm.
And there are skills to having a conversation in this sort of environment that we can support leaders to understand better, but it requires them looking at themselves. It requires a certain development, even transformation, so they become more aware of, frankly, some of their perspectives and even biases, right? So they have both the courage and the consideration to be reflective and to create this environment where others around them, that's their responsibility as leaders, to create the environment. They're not doing the work, they're doing the work through others, and they're creating a culture where people can have these conversations. And so helping them, I think that's a critical element of DEI, the dialogue, the quality of the dialogue that's reproduced, that's fractal, right? That's fractal throughout the whole organization. So I love the way that you emphasized conversation. The second point I could make about that is this fits into leadership development, because as one grows in their capacity to have more vulnerable and more complex, more demanding conversations.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think what I think we collectively see, I'm sure you guys have seen this as well, but with some of my clients, their intention is good and they give it appropriate lip service, if you will. And I say lip service because they want to create that environment, but they don't want to be in it. They don't want to be a part of it, right? They want everybody else to have that conversation, but then their level of participation is they kind of have, I want the team to kind of talk about diversity and how important it is. But I think what you said, Sandra, about, the self-awareness and the education and putting that mirror up and recognizing, oh yeah, no, I've got to be part of this conversation as well because I'm in it, right?
And people notice.
Of course, because it seems disingenuous if they're not in it, right? It's if you're just giving it lip service.
And they're not only noticing how the CEO or the leader is acting in the organization, people are now very conscious because things are happening in the political arena, in the public arena. They're watching how their firm is how quickly they respond, how genuinely they respond, how they respond to things that happen. And they expect, in many cases, there to be a response.
Yeah.
It's really true. Look, I don't know if the two of you think this is a good idea or not, but and I would love coaching so that everyone listening and watching gets some coaching too. So what I find with clients is that, of course, if I'm coaching them, they're often saying to me, I feel obligated now to do and say things that are different because I've been told XYZ is wrong now, right? And I'll give you an example in a minute so you can react to it. And so, of course, that makes things awkward, right? So if you're a leader who's, like you said, Karuna, like I've been leading, blah, 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 let's call someone who's been leading for 25 years, or even if you're a new leader, by the way, listening, but you're used to talking to people in a certain way. when someone tells you you can't say that anymore,
Right.
all of a sudden you become super self-conscious, right? You become awkward. Or if you don't, by the way, you might actually be the opposite of that, which is screw these people. I'm going to say whatever I want because I've been saying it.
Yeah.
It wasn't a problem before. And so like what we're saying, I think everybody is, it is time that first you have to do your own work. Like to me, before you have a conversation with people, you need to first understand yourself, like, and start to get to know, what are my values? What am I used to saying?
Mm-hmm.
Do I even know what my biases are? Right. So before you think about changing the way you talk to other people, unless you're egregious, unless you're doing something really bad and HR has been like, no, don't ever say that again. But for most of the people listening and watching, that's not the case. Like you're probably going to trainings or getting information where they're teaching you about conscious bias. They're teaching you about these things. And now this new awareness is here. So before it's about changing what you're doing with other people, it's actually about, doing the most strategic thing, which is thinking about what you're thinking and changing your thinking so that the conversations are maybe less awkward, or you don't need a script to kind of use new vocabulary. You're coming from a very different place.
I just so love the way you described that, because you took it down to the very personal level. Like, why can't I don't think it's offended people before. And so people are having to look at something that's very close to their identity, right? It's a pattern for them. They're aware of it. And you said something else, Chris, which is they have to think about the way they're thinking, which some people call the metacognition, right? You're not only thinking about what you're saying, but you're thinking about your patterns of thinking, which is a deeper sort of consciousness. But you brought up I think the whole was, one element that I can tease out of this in terms of the org change effort is that if you're looking at DEI, which I think is the I'm not going to say the correct way, but the most pragmatic way and the most strategic and useful way to look at it as org change, you have to say, am I really supporting the leadership the way they need to be, the way they need to be supported to make that, in a way, it's a transformation, to make that, it's more than a transition. It's a sort of a transformation because they need to think about themselves in a different way. And that takes will, it takes courage. And I hadn't brought this up, it takes humility, which some of us are not very good at.
It does take humility. Look, it is, everything you just said is so true. And I was thinking that, I was thinking about a client recently. Everything you just said just made me think of the situation where this gentleman had been doing business in China for a very long time and had had some really bad experiences in a manufacturing environment in China. Years and years. So he's in a new job now, and his company has just acquired a company in China, and they wanted to put that entity inside his division, his group. And he said to me, I can't say this out loud, but I don't like China and I don't want to manage Chinese people. And he vented to me for about 6 minutes. And the reason he was sharing that wasn't actually about Chinese people. It was him saying how afraid he is as a leader, that's his truth. That's been his historical experience. And he knows that's not an acceptable conversation, even though 20 years ago, he believes it was an acceptable conversation. And so again, he doesn't even know. So Sandra, he was basically saying to me, I don't even know how to change my thinking about this, Chris.
Oh.
I don't even know how do I do that? Right. So, I'm going to be awkward. I'm going to be behaving in a disingenuous way. So is it better for me to lie? Or is it better for me to tell the truth? And I say that to you because it sounds dramatic and maybe a little extreme, but I do believe these are the kind of dilemmas that this triggers for some people.
Yeah. And, I did a workshop recently entitled Candor and Diplomacy in the context of race and racism. And this is one way I introduced the workshop was to introduce the fact that people are going to feel awkward.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is uncomfortable. And when you are learning, and in other words, when you're learning and experimenting, you're stepping into a different you, really, a bigger you.
Yeah.
And I don't, people talk about the imposter syndrome, but I think there's some situations where it's not the imposter syndrome, where it's just you having the aspiration to be better. And so you do have to try new behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
If you're willing, if you're courageous, and it does feel vulnerable and awkward, uncomfortable. And I think normalizing that for people is one thing that we as coaches can do and say, yes, I understand, this is the way it's going to feel, but it's not always going to feel like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you may produce results in a conversation. This is where I work with my clients, like experiment with it. Is what you fear actually going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it doesn't. It has a totally different response. And as a leader, they then mirror that sort of learning and that vulnerability. But that awkwardness is part of aspiring to be someone bigger, better, different, more welcoming, more inclusive.
Yeah, and not feeling safe, being vulnerable is one thing, but you want to do it hopefully in a safe environment because you're afraid of being judged by other people, right? Regardless of what your title is. So that safety where we've all been in those meetings where if you even, I'll just speak for myself, where if I dare to kind of say, be vulnerable, I'm thinking, oh my God, I know that person's going to eye roll internally because they don't really care, right? They'll agree, they'll nod in the meeting, but really they will judge me after. And so I think that feeling of safety is important because you want to,
Yeah. And in this same workshop that I'm talking about, which I was actually, it was a workshop obviously about DEI, and I was a little bit apprehensive because it was online, it's sensitive, I don't know all the people, but I did try to set up some rules of engagement. And one of the rules of engagement is let's not be judgmental. Let's actually exercise grace and forgiveness.
Right.
People do make mistakes. If you're offended, please say something, in a civil way. Let's have a discussion. So that judgment issue is really, it's an important one.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I think it is too. Can we take a moment and talk about the difference between diversity, equity, and inclusion? Because we may have people listening or watching that don't understand why they're three different factors all kind of bundled into the same thing. So I don't want to just make assumptions because I think that we're operating potentially at you for sure, Sandra, at a pretty advanced level here as far as these topics go, since you teach things in it. But yeah, can we just level set here? Like, why do we need, why is there DEI together in a bundle seemingly around this issue?
Yeah, and just to add to the complexity, and then I'll go back to DEI, is the recent terms that have emerged are inclusion and belonging, which are outcomes. I mean, if you have an organization that is expressing authentically DE&I, then you have this inclusion and feeling of belonging. But diversity is having the representation of all the groups in your community, right? All the groups, sexual orientation, races, and again, race isn't really a thing, but the races as we refer to them, age, gender, sexual orientation, and so forth. Equity, we used to say equality, remember that? And it's equity, it's everyone having equal access, being able to access things. And so the way they access them, they might need a ramp, right? They might need different, so they have access to equal opportunity. And inclusion, of course, is the outcome of diversity and equity. I don't know if that
I think it is. I think it's helpful. And then why can you, I just want to pretend like we don't know, right? Because I want to level set for everyone. Belonging, like why all of a sudden has that been added?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a straight answer for that, but I can guess, I think it's an individual feeling like they can bring their whole self there
Mm-hmm.
because they do belong there. They are they're members.
Yes.
They're employees, they're part of that organization. They do belong. It's sort of a deeper, more personal, emotive,
That's right.
emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So again, for people watching and listening who are saying, well, I don't understand, is this about how much people get paid? I want to throw out some examples that I know live on the teams that we work with. Like, for instance, before COVID-19, but also now in 2021, what's coming back is in-person meetings. Woo! Retreats and team events, slowly but surely coming back onto the calendar. And one of the things I get asked all the time as a facilitator for teams is about team activities. And there was a time when I worked with many executive level teams that had all men. And so what would happen often is that it would be pretty common that they liked a lot of the same things, like sports, golf, for instance, or, so we would get ready to plan something and they would be pretty aligned that they all wanted to do certain things and they all were able to do those things. And then what I have seen in more recent years, as we add more diversity to those teams, specifically anybody, like you're saying, Sandra, right, talk about equity and inclusion and accessibility, is, well, guess what? We have people who don't like sports. We have people who can't play sports in the same way. I can't play golf. So if it would be mandatory that the activity would be that, it would be, I could certainly try, but I wouldn't feel confident doing that, right? So for me, that is always an example. If someone asks me, and specifically executives, I'm like, let me give you one that might be close to home. And then if someone says, I don't want to do that, and I don't think the team should be able to do that anymore, it becomes uncomfortable, right? Because if it's a norm, if it's what we're used to doing, it tends to create the need to have conversations that people feel uncomfortable bringing up. So to me, that is a tangible example. One, by the way, that many of my leaders who are planning these offsites, retreats, et cetera, often take for granted. Like they don't see it coming.
Yeah, I can't believe you brought up the golf example, and this can be edited out if it's not relevant, but can I just say 30 years ago, I learned to play golf because I worked at a male-dominated industry or company, and that's where business got done. And I thought, if I'm not out on the golf course, I'm out of all those conversations, right? So I changed my behavior because of that. But 30 years later, we're now saying, you're saying as a coach, as a facilitator, time out, guys. Not everybody wants to play golf. So let's figure out how to do something differently. That is a huge shift. Just like when I think about it, kind of blows my mind. I think, wow, okay, we have come a long way where now at least different conversations are being had.
Yeah.
It's just an interesting example.
Yeah, you're coming up with a lot of different examples. And this is a little bit tangential, but I did want to bring it up. I think it's important before we finish the conversation. And that is when you talk about DEI or a DEI initiative. One of the things is you really have to do some measurement. You really have to find out.
Right.
You really have to invest in a survey, interviews, focus groups. You really have to do a well-designed discovery of what is going on in the company across the different departments, practice groups, up and down hierarchy in different regions, because one shouldn't make assumptions. Totally. Or it shouldn't be based on hearsay. This should be systematic discovery. And And we don't need to talk about all the different phases. We don't have time for that now. But looking at the inside, like you'll develop some recommendations, and you want to integrate that so it feels, so it sort of, it's not programmatic. So it is integrated into, as much as possible, existing programs, maybe a new initiative. But the change has to be not only in the culture, but you need to look at the policies and the practices.
Correct.
In other words, of course, you know, in some definitions of culture, you might include the policies, but it's just not the way people talk to one another. It's just not the norms. It is the policies and the practices about performance evaluation, about recruiting, about hiring, about how people express complaints. All those have to be looked at.
Yeah, and you got to look at your own strategic objectives and make sure they're aligned, right?
Exactly. And all those have to be aligned to your overall organizational strategy, your practice strategy. Absolutely.
Sandra, thanks for moving us to action. I want to spend the last 10 minutes really giving tangible tools, if you will, or suggesting suggestions to the people listening and viewing. And I think we already have brought some things, so I want to make sure they're super clear. I'm going to rephrase what Sandra just said. There absolutely needs to be some discovery. And I say to all of you listening, I don't care if you're the CEO of something or you're a new manager, whoever you are, whatever you're doing, if you're listening to this, I know you want to be better. And one way to do that is to get a reality check, right? So do some discovery for yourself first. Like, what is your thinking about this? What are your biases and opinions? Do you have any? Chances are you do. If you're a human and you've been walking on this earth for a while, you have beliefs. And how are those showing up for you? And maybe what are you thinking, and what are in your values related to diversity, equity, inclusion? And then I think what Sandra said is super important. So if you're in a big org, you probably have HR, and HR might technically own diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm going to challenge you. I think we're going to challenge you that we don't think this just needs to be a program that HR owns. This needs to be a leadership initiative that is integrated in your culture of your team. That's why we said it needs to be sooner or later woven into your thinking so that you naturally have conversations with people in new ways. Maybe you have different team engagements, right? So you're doing a reality check on yourself, and then doing a reality check on your team and your organization, and starting to understand, okay, what does this mean to us? And what does it mean? Sandra said it, I think, a few times, and I love the word practices. And for everybody, a practice is what you do all the time. You know, how fast do you answer email? You know, how do you respond to people? When do you respond? Do you respond? All of those things. That's a simple example of a practice, but you also, like she said, you have practices about the way you think and interact with people in your organization. So part of that is also taking stock of that, right? What are our practices? And I don't know if the two of you want to add maybe some tangible things that people could go away from, and maybe even resources that they could read or look into, anything that you want to give to these listeners.
I think what I'll add, I'll just second the whole thing about HR, not just as an ex senior HR executive. You know, the pressure was always on that HR needed to be responsible and was the responsible party. But as Chris said, this is a company-wide initiative. Every person working in the organization is responsible for diversity in the organization and DEI initiatives. But again, that starts with conversation. That starts with having systems in place and having all of that. So yeah, it's just not HR's job only.
I mean, the other element I think of that's related to this is your communication strategy. I mean, from the very beginning, I do believe leaders need help. First of all, their understanding of what diversity is emerging. They're learning as we as coaches or consultants are working with them. And so just being really explicit, like, what are we saying? You know, what foundation are we laying for how people are going to perceive this initiative? or our efforts? What words are we going to use? How are we going to communicate this? And if it's coming out of HR, it doesn't communicate that. That's what I was aiming for. I had forgotten. It should come not only from HR, but it should come from the CEO. And that says this is important to us. This is strategic. This is about who we are.
And I think that I'll also add to that, that there's a difference, between intention and what we actually do.
Action.
Right? Action, execution, whatever you want to call it. What happens every day, oftentimes there's like a lag, right? Like we have good intention. We talk about specifically this topic. I find organizations have good intentions, right? They know, oh, this needs to change, but actually changing something is difficult, right? Like we talked about it. It happens, it has to filter all the way down seemingly into those conversations, into our decisions. And so I guess the other thing I would say to everybody listening and watching is that, first of all, you need to understand that, right? Just saying this is important doesn't flip a switch and make it different. And we have a lot of people, right? We have a lot of people we're talking about who are actually anticipating change, wanting change, waiting for change in organizations that are saying we're committed to change. Until it gets into our daily interactions, nothing's changing.
Right. And I think it's so important for leaders, whether you're senior or up and coming, to be able to articulate what problem you're trying to solve. Like, why are you doing like that? That is important, right? Change for change's sake alone is not enough. Just because DEI is a hot topic and we're going to jump on the bandwagon, not enough, right? It comes from a more personal space and being able to articulate why. What are we trying to solve here? I think is important.
Purpose, like, why are we, exactly, Karuna, why are we doing this?
Yeah, like why? $1 million question.
It's so good, right? I feel like we've scratched the surface. I knew I was going to feel like this, by the way. And we're kind of coming to the end of our time today. So we might have to do part 2, who knows? I would just like to first, just either of you who want to say anything before I close us down, that maybe you were itching to say.
I was sort of feeling like, we'll take your questions now.
Right.
We'll take your questions, because I was sort of feeling an audience there, even though the audience hasn't been created yet. So I'm reaching out to the audience right now.
That's right. That's right. Well, it's funny, Sandra, honestly, everybody, like this needs discussion. It needs dialogue. It needs new listening. So I love that you did that. Actually, I wish we were live, because it would be a fantastic thing to take live questions. So maybe next time we do some kind of live conversation, and then everyone can benefit from other people's questions, brave questions about this. But for today, I just want to urge everyone listening and watching that if this is of interest to you, and like I said, you're a leader, and this is something where you want to be better, you want to be different, you want to be doing whatever it is your organization is talking about doing, and you don't know how, I'm going to encourage you to look for resources. We, of course, have resources in ariacoach.com for free. Just if you give us your email, I promise we won't spam you. But there's a ton of stuff in there that you can look at. And maybe what we could also do as an action item, this group, is also link to some things that Sandra has, resources, and what her organization does, just so you can find your way, right? Learn new things. And we've actually used some terms here today too, like metacognition. Awesome. So I love that you introduced that. I always say, think about your thinking, but I don't call it its real name. So we will put that there so everyone can get more information about those things if they're interested.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, great.
Thank you for joining us, Sandra. You make us all look better with the doctor title. Doctor in the midst. So there you go.
True. Experts and doctors. We need more. Okay, so everybody, thank you for listening and watching. We hope that you'll come back for our next episode. And like I said, I'm going to try and schedule a part 2 for this, because we hardly scratched the surface of a super important, relevant issue that all of you probably want more in your toolkit So we'll work on that. So for now, we'll just say thank you from RA Consulting, and we'll see you next time.